we're talking about authority today and how God looks at authority and those that are in charge and leadership and those that have the responsibility of that, and how God honors that, how he values that. But then I really want to talk about, maybe in the second segment, in the exorcism work that you do, the demons recognize authority. So let's start there and let's unpack this together to see if we can give a better understanding to our Morning Joy listeners and what it really means to really obey and adhere to those that are in charge.
Yeah. You know, authority and obedience, they're words that, I mean, it's just human nature, right? It kind of makes us cringe a little bit on the inside. Like, nobody likes to be told what to do. And we tend to be, and I think maybe particularly here in the United States, we tend to be a little bit skeptical of authority figures. You know, we're very independent-minded. On the whole, we're independent-minded. And so these ideas, which, you know, they're so valuable, and they're the reason, or at least part of the reason, why the church has maintained. You know, here we are 2,000 years later. It's basically the oldest continuous organized institution in the world. You know, it's the oldest country in the world, outlasting empires left and right in different nations, all of it. So part of it that is powerful and stable is authority. And that's the idea. And it's the same, you know, the same idea in the military. The military maintains the organization and maintains stability and predictability by expecting authority to be respected and obeyed. Okay. So we know it's a powerful way to relate with each other. When in the church, you know, when we talk about authority, we're talking about somebody who can speak authoritatively is one thing that is used. So, you know, to take myself as an example, not because I'm special, but I'm an example that, you know, is readily available to myself. So, you know, I'm a peritus of religious demonology and exorcism. Well, what does that mean? Well, peritus is just a Latin word that means expert. So when the church, and when people say the church, they mean a bishop, because the local priest isn't the authority, the bishop of the diocese is. The pastor's the authority to an extent in his parish, but the bishop is the authority. So when the church asked me to train priests in exorcism, well, as a layperson, and there not being any college degrees in exorcism in the church, there's no way to say whether this person can speak authoritatively on this topic in the typical ways, like, oh, you went to law school, so you can give us a talk on the law. Okay, so the church then evaluated my experience and background and all the training that I received personally and all the exposure I had had, and decided to grant me the title of expert in this area, which was a formal way of the church saying to the other members of the church, you can rely on this person to speak authoritatively, and the institution is endorsing that and formally saying, by a decree, this person has the authority to teach on this. And that was necessary, Deb, in fact required, before I could go into a seminary and teach seminarians, or go to a clergy day for a bishop and teach all the priests in the diocese on a clergy day or two. So it protects us, just like having our doctors, you know, be licensed doctors, right? You want your doctor to have gone to med school and passed exams and be a licensed doctor before you rely on them to save your life, right? So you expect the institution, the government, to regulate that and give you some assurance that I can see my doctor as an authority and rely on them. And I need some larger organization to do that, like the American Medical Association, the government, etc. So authority shouldn't necessarily make us be like, oh, I don't want to listen to the church telling me what I can and can't do. That feels yucky, you know. I'll decide if I'm a good person. I'm not going to listen to all these rules. It really, it's not that. It's about a voice, whether it's the church teaching on a dogma, after generations of reflection of theologians and people spending entire lifetimes studying these questions, whether it's somebody your bishop has appointed to teach your kids in religious education, maybe religious education in the parish. Do they speak authoritatively? Has the church recognized that they have proper training to do that? I know you have experience being involved in religious education in the parish. So I just wanted to start by saying that it's not a bad word that we need to kind of recoil from.
Well, and you nailed it at the beginning of this. So where especially in the U.S., we have a real problem obeying anything. I mean, it's like the first thing that I think comes out of a lot of people's mouths is, don't tell me what to do. I know what I'm going to do, and I can take care of myself. I don't need to have to listen to you. You're not better than me. And it goes on and on. And but when you talk about somebody in a leadership capacity, whether it's in their home, as a parent or as an employer or in their community or in the church, there's a heavy responsibility to being a leader of people, right? There's a heavy responsibility. You're talking about the military. There's a lot of responsibility to that. And that's why, when you study the angels, oftentimes, and this is private revelation, they will say, though, a lot of saints have said that, bishops have two angels or more than two angels, because they have a bigger responsibility, a bigger role to carry on and to lead and to do the right thing. So it's not easy. I don't think it's easy to lead well. I don't think it's easy. I think you have to really be very sincere about it and very genuine and really want the best for people. And so I think when people see that and recognize that, they are willing to follow because they know it's going to be better for them. And there's a sense of order and peace in that. You see it in the family. When a mom and dad can really properly lead, and I mean they walk the walk, they talk the talk, not just say I'm the dad and I'm the mom and you got to listen to me, do what I say, not as I do, that whole nonsense, but really lead and be an example. You see that beautiful, respectful order in the family. You see kids, never talking bad to their parents and never talking bad. You see that. It's really quite beautiful. It's rare. I'll tell you, it's rare. But when it does happen, it's really, I think, very peaceful and joy filled, and it has such a calm to it and a sense of order. Now, I mean, we're obviously talking about, we're relating it to the church, right? And how God sees authority. But I wanted to put that out there because I think sometimes people who are in leadership roles, they get a bad rap. They think sometimes people think that they're just control freaks, they're this or that. No, that's not necessarily true. I can tell you that. I mean, it's interesting. I have an undergraduate degree in business management, so obviously that's a leadership, degree. And then I was in, like you said, religious education. I was director of religious education for many, many years, youth minister, and then sacrament prep and other roles in the church, adult faith formation. And it wasn't easy. I used to go home at night and I would say, I hope I said the right thing. I hope I did the right thing. I hope so-and-so, does the next right thing. I was constantly beating myself up saying, please, because I didn't want to be held accountable if I did anything wrong, So there's a lot to be said about all of this. But I think if we understand it properly, like I have no problem following a really good leader. None. I have no problem obeying it. You would think I would, because some people may think I'm a bit of a control person, but I have no problem following somebody that I respect. Like Adam, if you told me to go do something, I trust you and respect you so much, I would do it. I wouldn't even question it.
Mm. Well, I mean, I'm humbled by that, and I certainly wouldn't ask you to do anything silly.
Right, right, I know.
But maybe on April Fool's next year I will.
That's true.
But you're pointing out something positive about the idea of authority, and you can see it in nature too. Like it's so foundational just to operating in groups, right? Like dogs, wolves, they have a natural hierarchy. They establish dominance one of them takes the role of leader, and that then brings peace to the rest of the group because nobody's now fighting each other and trying to figure out who's in charge. It's been decided, and now they can function, and they tend to function well as a group from that point forward until maybe a new leader is needed for some reason. And you'll see that in many different ways. You'll see it, as you say, family-wise. Children, the offspring of animals, our offspring, human beings, they will naturally bond with their parents and seek their parents' guidance, protection, etc. It's just part of life. And on the other side, I'd like to talk about the spiritual dimension of this. And maybe we can start, I believe it was Fatima, where it was in one of the diaries where Mary said, obedience is writ large in heaven. It's just such a neat turn of phrase that's always stuck with me.
Wow, I can't wait to hear that. Say that again, rewind a little bit. What happened at Fatima?
Well, there was a moment at Fatima where, and I don't have the whole story at my fingertips, but one of the events that happened was there was a lot of drama going on, and people were upset about these kind of children going out of doors and the crowds gathering around them, and some of the political people didn't like that. And they kind of said, we're not going to allow this to happen. You can't have thousands of people out here again next week when you say this is going to happen again. And so the children, I believe, asked Mary when she came, they said, like, next week they're not going to let us come here to see you. Can you come and see us in the church? And instead of saying, like, yes, that's fine, I'll come to the church because you can't come here, you know what she said? She said, ask the pastor if he will allow it.
Oh, interesting.
And it really makes you kind of like stop and step back, like, oh, like, how interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, but then you think, like, well, it's her son's church. She was obedient to God's law her entire life. She was the Immaculate Conception. She didn't violate God's law in her life. Why would she violate the laws and regulations and the structure of her son's church? She wouldn't. That doesn't make any sense. And so it was either in the context of that or one of the other discussions that she had with the children where she was explaining the incredible spiritual importance of obedience. And that's where that phrase that's always stuck with me, obedience is writ large in heaven. It came from one of those diaries.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you had mentioned at the very opening about at the exorcism work, and we certainly see that play out. But is there something specific you were wondering about that?
Yeah, you'd mentioned one time you were sharing with the show team. I think it was before we even started the show. We always talk and get prepared for the show, and you mentioned something about that the demons recognize authority. So when an element or a person or something like present in the room, they have to recognize it. It's not, they can't just avoid it. Can you kind of share, maybe give an example of that? Because I think you've talked of a few times, like, maybe they're forced to kneel at the tabernacle or something of that nature.
Yeah, that's okay. So in general, the first thing that we need to kind of understand is it's not like in the movies. The demons are only doing what Jesus allows them to do. Okay. They can't go beyond what he has given them license to do. And you can see this in the book of Job in the Bible very clearly, where Satan wants to go and torment Job and ask permission from God to do that. And then God says, you can go this far, but no further. And then the devil goes right up to that line, but goes no further because his creator has only given him so much license. So that's the first thing to understand, is they're not chaotically just doing whatever they want. Now, when that encounter happens between Christ's church and the demon and the possessed person, in the person of the exorcist who is there carrying the local bishop's authority behind him, backing him up, that demon then has to obey that exorcist. Now, the actual expulsion of the demons a little more complicated because Jesus does that on his timetable when that soul has lived out the conversion that Jesus wants for that particular demon to be gone. And that's something that's taken 20 years for me to understand. Okay, get to the nuts and bolts of it. If a priest is there and they're, say, visiting us to sit in on sessions and learn a little bit about exorcism by seeing it, because that's really the only way you can learn, the demons will often put them in their place at the very beginning of the session by quite literally saying, "Him I have to obey. You are a visitor. I don't have to do anything that you say." Because their egos are big, their pride is big, they hate being subjected to human beings. They consider human beings, beneath them and all of that. But they will obey the proper authority of the church in the exorcist. And if somebody inadvertently, in all the drama and noise and everything, just somebody who isn't the exorcist with that authority says something simple like, "Get out," in the throes of, the screaming and everything else going on, they will often stop and turn and check them and say, "You don't have the right to tell me to do anything." Now, it gets really interesting, Deb, when maybe we're doing a diagnostic session trying to figure out if a person is actually possessed. And let's say we see some dramatic stuff and we don't have time to get into all that. And we say, okay, sure looks like a real case. Well, the priest doesn't have permission yet to do the exorcism. And so the demon doesn't have to obey him yet. Father can step into the hall, leave the room, call the bishop on his cell phone, get verbal permission. Now, it needs to be written, and it will come in a written form, but you can get verbal permission in the meantime, and step back in and say, "In the name of Jesus, sit in the chair and be quiet till I tell you to talk." And 9 times out of 10, they will go over and sit down and be quiet, at least for a little while. And then they'll get ornery and you'll have to deal with them. It's not as simple as, it's not, exorcisms aren't simple and easy, but he does have the authority to say, "Sit down and be quiet," and they will, as soon as that bishop's authority is bestowed upon the priest in the context of that case.
Wow. And when your team sees this, and are they just are they overwhelmed by it all?
Well, I mean, we have a number of priests that come and sit in when they're brand new to this, say their first day of seeing various cases, because we do a number of cases at a time in sequence. Yes, they're a little bit rattled at the end of the day. No matter how much you try to prepare yourself for it, especially when they do something that you can't explain away, the rational mind can't explain it away and dismiss it. Mm-hmm. Like we had a priest who speaks Arabic fairly well, well enough to have a basic conversation. And this person, is a local Pittsburgh person, that no exposure to that language or anything close to it. And, they had a fluid conversation in Arabic with Father. And on a previous day, they were speaking Italian, and they also had no experience with Italian. And the first time, you see something like that for yourself, people tend to be a little rattled because it kind of, they realize, okay, my worldview has to truly change now.
Right.
It's one thing to have armchair faith and be like, okay, I believe this, and I read this book, and I believe it. It's another thing to see it.
Yeah. I'm so glad you're able to share a little glimpses of it with us, because, we're not going to ever, get to see that, your world that you do on the exorcism ministry work every Friday, you and the team. And I will tell you that it's kind of interesting. And I think it helps us to understand our faith better. And I was just going to say, Adam, that I think, we started this segment talking about authority and obedience. I think we need to make being obedient cool again. What do you say?
Well, I think I want to be obedient to Jesus. Yep. I want to do what he wants me to do in this life, and I want to get to heaven. And so obedience is a big part of that.
Amen to that.